Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Tech Talk, our October Tech Talk. And we're going to be talking about impact management today. But please do let us know where you're from in the chat function. Please feel free to pass comments in the chat function. But if you do want to ask questions of the panel, we will be having an opportunity to ask questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. Of course, we'd love for you to show your reactions, your clapping for things that are good, thumbs up. Thank you very much. And we'd really like to know where you're from. So please let us know where you're from. But without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Peter Duffy, the chair of our technical committee, to facilitate today's Tech Talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And for the benefit of those few that are still trying to come in, I'm going to kick off just at 2 past the hour. So if you'd like to get to know each other, share your comments, your thoughts in chat and so forth, or if you have any particular questions in advance you'd like to put to our 3 rock stars here on impact management, please do that, put them in the Q&A, and we'll kick off formally just in a moment. Right, for 2 past the hour. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night to wherever you are, and welcome to the 5th ESG Exchange Tech Talk. This is co-promoted with the UN's Impact Management Platform, and we have our 3 rock stars today, Joe Fackler from IMP, Melissa Rojas from UNDP and founder of Impacto, and Vincent Sigerink. Vincent, I do apologize in advance for having made a mess of your name, from the OECD. And this event, as before, kindly sponsored by Archer IRM. Before I get in to the details of today's topic, I just want to remind people of the ESG Exchange, our purpose. I'm just going to ask Carolyn maybe to share her screen, just to remind people of why we're here in the ESG Exchange. And at a very high level, we're here because there isn't enough expertise in the world to get around to all of the organizations that require assistance and require support. So our purpose is to convene the global standard setters, the regulators, the professional bodies, and to create this coalition of enabling organizations who have all agreed that what we will do as a charitable organization is to provide free of charge how-to playbooks that speak to the particular challenges facing 10,000 global organizations. And we have articulated our impact ambition, which is between now and 2030 to bring 10 million directors and managers from those 10,000 global organizations through sustainability fundamentals. We're not forgetting about the small and medium-sized enterprises, because all our how-to playbooks will be equally approachable and certainly accessible to them. But we're also conscious of the trickle-down effect from the global 10,000 and very cognizant of the impact on global economic activity that comes from that global 10,000. And if we don't make a meaningful contribution there at that level, we don't get the planetary needle to move, we don't get the societal needle to move. And on the screen just now, you can see the coalition of enabling organizations and so forth. Thank you, Carolyn, for that. I just want to set the stage before I do the formal introductions. We've just finished a series of tech talks on the whole challenge facing the world in the context of what is materiality, double, single impact materiality. But now the rubber has to meet the road somewhere. And effectively, that is in the whole realm of impact management. And I just want to share with you, just to remind everybody on the call, the United Nations Brundtland Commission definition of sustainability, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. And when I think of impact management, and I suppose not surprisingly coming from Archer IRM, I think of it in terms of traditional risk management, which is kind of first order thinking. This is the event. These are the impacts, on financials, on stakeholders, and so forth. But really, where the world is going, and certainly in risk management, and ESG is causing us to do this, is causing us to get into second and third order, fourth order thinking. But that type of stuff, really, a lot of it falls into the very hard to do bucket. But it still has to be understood. It has to be embraced, because we're all witnessing live this investor-driven market shift. It's a shift away from shareholder primacy to multi-stakeholder impact economics. That's the real train that's left the station. People are hearing a lot about ESG and sustainability, but fundamentally, the real train that's left the station is how we value, what we value, and the impact measurements and so forth. So now, having set that kind of stage, as it were, I'm going to just share with you the profiles of our three speakers, and their backgrounds will resonate with you in the context of what I've presented as just kind of setting the stage, as it were. Joe Fackler. Joe is the platform manager for the Impact Management Platform, a collaboration between the leading providers of international standards, frameworks, and guidance for impact management. Drawing from experience in engagement, operations, and communications, Joe works alongside the platform's facilitation team to ensure the smooth running of the initiative. The platform represents the next phase of a collaboration that was formerly facilitated by the Impact Management Project, where Joe worked for 3 years as its engagement lead. She previously worked in communications and project management for LGT Impact and Berenberg's private banking division. She holds an MA in Globalization, Business and Development at the Institute of Development Studies, and a BA in French at the University of Leeds. Melissa Rojas. Melissa is the Chief Impact Officer. I'm going to make a mess of this. It's French, Fondation Asset Manager. I apologize again for making a mess of your name, your organization there, Melissa. A Canadian impact management fund manager that invests globally. FGA structures investment opportunities in underexploited and high potential sectors that generate market returns and generate positive and measurable environmental and social benefits. Melissa is also advisor to the UNDP SDG Impact on impact management and sustainability. Vincent. Vincent is an economist and policy analyst at the OECD WISE Centre. WISE is an acronym for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity. He has a background in statistics and the measurement of well-being and progress, and the applications of such measures in public policy. He is currently responsible for the WISE Centre's work on the measurement of the non-financial performance of firms. In this capacity, he works to align official statistics of stakeholder well-being with business measures, and he contributes to the Impact Management Platform. His contributions here involves the provision of technical support to its agendas, that is to say, of the IMP, Impact Management Platform, on interoperability and research and development. He also supports the OECD's contributions to the Business for Inclusive Growth Coalition and other business groups. He has also previously worked as an advisor in the Office of the Secretary General of the OECD. He has a bachelor's degree in economics from Macalester College and a master's degree in public policy and economics. With that, I'm bearing in mind that the kind of thematic is now changed from materiality. Now for this month and next month, our thematic is into impact management, measurement and valuation and so forth. And the focus being on what matters most, what are the challenges, and what are the insights which our panelists can share with the participants so that you participants can bring it back to your organizations. Because of the density of this topic and the heavy lifting and understanding and so forth, we're going to do something slightly different. We have asked Jo to prepare an actual presentation. It won't take very long, but as she's painting a picture, it can help to share that, communicate our message with use of some slides. And following that, then there are some questions I'm going to put to her and the panel as we tease out and unknot this whole area of impact management. Jo, if I could ask you maybe to share with us What is the impact management platform and how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Peder. And I'd just like to echo your thanks to everyone who is joining us in today's session. So as Peder just mentioned, the whole purpose of today's discussion is to look at exactly what impact management really is and why it's needed, and really how to get started with impact management. Allow me just to take a few minutes of your time just to give you the 101, if you will, starting with a very quick introduction as to what the platform itself is. Just give me 1 moment. Right, so the platform itself. So the platform is a collaboration, as Peder just mentioned, between the leading providers of sustainability standards and guidance. And together, these partners are coordinating efforts to clarify and mainstream the practice of impact management. Many of you will no doubt recognize a number of logos here. You'll therefore understand that the majority of the partners' resources have a multi-sector or a multi-impact topic scope. But they're very much complementary in the way that they address different aspects of the market. And so together, these organizations very much cater across, mainstream businesses, investors, financial institutions, but also the more impact-driven communities as well, such as the impact investors and sort of social enterprise community as well. And really, there's a very distinct logic behind this, which is to cater to the full ecosystem of standards and guidance and tools so that we can enable greater cross-collaboration and harmonization as well. Just a very quick word on how the partners are going about doing that. So the first 3 years of the IMP's work is really focused on establishing foundational content that reflects the partners' consensus view of what impact management is. And so to support those efforts, the partners' collaboration is structured around 4 work streams. Firstly, on driving clarity on the practice of impact management. So this really means how to work together to build a clear consensus view of impact management, such as agreeing a common set of actions of impact management, and also signposting to the resources that enable organizations to carry out those actions. There's also then the interoperability work stream. So in other words, finding ways to advance the coherence, the complementarity, the interoperability of the partners' resources, namely through consensus building on key concepts and terminology and other methods. There's also the research and development agenda. So the partners are addressing system-wide risks that affect the effectiveness of impact management resources and practices. So there's a lot of work being done there on, the naming and classification of sustainability topics, but also industries and sectors, which all have an impact on, or all have an effect, I should say, on how impact management is really carried out. And then there's one final cross-cutting work stream, which is really around policy and regulatory engagement. So this is just to ensure that the emerging policy and regulation, which of course the tech talks previously have touched on quite a lot, it's really ensuring that that emerging work is therefore also aligned with what the consensus view of the partners is. So that's all I'm saying today on what the partners are doing itself, but I really wanted to spend more time on what impact management is and why it's needed, starting with an all-important definition of what impact management itself is. And so this definition is really important because it reflects the consensus view of the partners. The partners themselves have agreed to this shared definition of impact management, which is the process by which an organization understands, acts on, and communicates its impacts on people and the natural environment in order to reduce negative impacts, increase positive impacts, and ultimately to achieve sustainability and to increase well-being. Just one thing to say, I'll be saying the word organizations quite a lot throughout this short presentation. That is to encompass enterprises, investors, and financial institutions as a group. Okay, so the primary tenet of the partners is that impact management is relevant to all types of organizations, no matter their motivations for doing so. So there are many organizations that are already managing their impacts, and they tend to be organizations that are perhaps aiming to solve environmental and social problems and to increase people's well-being. So in other words, these organizations are pursuing positive impact as part of their overall strategy. alongside, or maybe even separately to this, there are other organizations that will be seeking to operate sustainably. And so that is being within environmental and social boundaries. So in other words, they're ensuring that their operations, that their activities are aligned with sustainability thresholds. There are still many organizations that don't practice impact management, but do still consider sustainability from a compliance or a risk management perspective. And that is really important, because that just shows that this work is already being done in certain ways and forms. And it shows that impact management is therefore relevant to all of these organizations, since it not only helps them understand and affect and act on the effects that they have on people and the planet, but it also helps them to manage their exposure to risks and opportunities from their external environment. So to put this in another way, impact management is understood to be relevant no matter the scope of the materiality approach. And I think this is really important, because obviously we've had these materiality discussions through the tech talks previously. So I just wanted to take a sort of diagram that many of you may recognize from previous discussions to really look at differences in materiality scope. And here we've just placed the rationale as to how impact management can support all types of organizations. So there's the sort of the more obvious one, which is about operating sustainability and contributing to solutions. So what I just said, and that very much falls into the impact materiality perspective. But then there are two other very key reasons as to why impact management is relevant and how it can support organizations. One is by the way in which it enables organizations to manage their idiosyncratic risks and opportunities. So looking at how to prevent sustainability risks to financial performance from arising to their business, and also seizing opportunities to improve their financial performance. There's also the notion of managing system-wide risks and opportunities as well. And so that is, looking at how to understand the wider set of risks that may promote or hinder the financial returns and stability of the markets, but also indeed promotes the well-being of people and the natural environment. So risk management here in these last 2 points here are typically applied to the financial materiality scope, whereby those system-wide risks and opportunities are relevant to the value of organization. But this all fits within the umbrella of impact management. So one of the salient points that the partners make is in a thought piece that they produced back in July of this year. And that is taking that risk management thought and saying why we need to go beyond this narrow approach to sustainability risk management and to adopt impact management. And this slide is intended to look at the second point on the previous slide. So why impact management is a means to managing risks and opportunities that are specific to the organization, those idiosyncratic risks. So why is that the case? Well, it's because the organization's impacts and dependencies. It's because of those. So there are several ways in which an organization's impact on people and the natural environment may present risks to its own sustained financial performance, including by posing reputational, operational, technological risks, for example. But risks may also arise from the organization's dependencies, or their reliance on environmental and social resources. So an organization's depletion of human, social, and natural resources through negative impacts may directly affect its ability to continue to use such resources, and thereby that gives itself operational risks. So it's therefore important to manage impacts on people and natural environment, because it helps to sustain social environmental resources, but it also improves the organization's risk management and therefore helps it to sustain its financial performance. An example of this is on the following slide, which I'm just bringing up now. So put simply, let's just take an example here using an oil company. So if the company has an oil spill, it will have an obvious negative impact on people and the natural environment by causing ecosystem damage. Now, these numerous impacts will go beyond affecting people and the planet and will contribute to the company's own risks, otherwise known as this idiosyncratic risk. And so, for example, the reputational risks arising from this spill may drive down demand for its products and services, and the legal risks involved could significantly increase costs to the business. So the company is therefore incentivized to manage its impacts and dependencies as a way to manage its own risks and opportunities, and of course, importantly, to preserve social and environmental systems. And so currently, many organizations approach the management of sustainability issues primarily from the perspective of these idiosyncratic risks and opportunities. But what remains underappreciated is the fact that impacts also represent contributions to system-wide risks and opportunities, even when they don't yet pose perhaps a quantifiable entity-specific risk. So let me just take one more moment just to explain that a little bit more. Okay, so this slide here really is here to show that there is very much evidence that supports the idea that suboptimal environmental and social outcomes will undermine overall economic performance and thereby undermine corporate and financial returns, since economic growth and corporate profits tend to go hand in hand. And so this slide simply illustrates the way that enterprises, investors, and financial institutions will have impacts on people and the natural environment, with the boxes on the left and the right-hand side showing examples of the different impact topics that will be affected by the organizations. It also shows the fact that organizations are intrinsically dependent on all people, on people and the natural environment, since the changes in those impact topics may present risks and opportunities to the organizations over the short, medium, and long term. And so, for example, here, it's been shown, in the case of income equality, that suboptimal people-related outcomes, such as excessive inequalities, may also affect macro-level economic and financial outcomes. In the case of ecosystems, to give you an example here, the World Bank estimates that a partial collapse in select ecosystem services could cost 2.3% in global GDP on an annual basis by 2030. One final example is in the case of gender equality. So it's estimated that fully closing the global gender gap in the labor market would add around $28 trillion to global GDP by 2025 relative to business as usual scenarios. So that's a difference of 26% of global GDP. These examples highlight the need to go beyond this narrow entity-specific risk management approach and to adopt impact management in order to manage these risks and as well to operate sustainably. So look, what I've put forward to you today is very much a short summary of why we need to manage impact. But if you want to learn more about this, the platform's website, all of this partner shared guidance provides a wealth of information for you to explore in your own time. And more about the need for impact management is presented in this thought piece that I just mentioned. So it argues that, impact management is a fundamental imperative, but it also sets out a shared call to action by the partners for all practitioners, governments, policymakers, and international standard setters as well to do their bit to help impact management move into more of a mainstream practice so that it is more accessible and more understood and provides those risk management opportunities, but also the opportunity to preserve social and environmental ecosystems. I think that's all I will leave you with right now, but I hope that provides a good basis for discussion.
Thank you, Jo, for that. And I enjoyed reading the recent paper that the partners published and so forth. And look, I'm an old soldier. I try and bring things down to my level of understanding. We don't quite understand how the body maintains this homeostasis, this balance of whatever it is, 35, 36 degrees Celsius. But we know that the body finds a way of keeping this complex dynamic system, which is our body and all the organs, all functioning in concert together. And we kind of take it for granted. And it seems to me what's happening in the world, that there's a consciousness now at the macroeconomic, macro-prudential, the transnational governmental levels, that they're saying the body isn't well. The body meaning not just climate, but people. We're crowded now as a planet. We all know what it's like when we're walking around our house and we didn't maybe put on our shoes, we banged our toe. That can really upset how the body functions for the rest of the day. So it's a consciousness that that no man is an island, no company operates in a vacuum. We're all part of a complex dynamic system, and having a homeostasis, having an equilibrium around that requires that we all understand the impacts we have, the second, third order thinking. But here's a problem, and I'm conscious now of time. We've gone for hours on this topic, so I'm going to rush through my 3 questions. And I'm going to ask Carolyn just now to put up poll 1. And the first poll is, do we understand or not, the imperative for impact management? Carolyn, can you share that? The first poll, I'd be interested in getting the results, and then I'd be putting up the first question.
Having a little bit of a difficulty here. I'll put it up as soon as I can.
Well, fair enough. Whilst you're doing that, so Carolyn, put that up. So I'm thinking about the 10,000 global organizations that are just faced with this tsunami of regulation, this concert of, we have CSRD in Europe, we have what's happening in California and the SEC, and then we have IFRS for the rest of the world, a tsunami of regulation. My question for the panelists is, there's so many standards, so many tools, so many systems, business as usual is tough enough. So can you help us make sense? And I'm going to start off again with you just now. Help us make sense of how our organizations meant to embrace this, understand it, and apply it. And please keep the answers short, because I do want to keep some time for at the end of the webinar. Joe, over to you. How do you make sense of all this?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so quick answer here is that I do fully appreciate that there is a lot of information out there. There's a range of different tools that are guiding all types of organizations to manage their impact. And so on the surface, it may seem that these are overlapping, but there is a logic. And this is what the platform is about. The platform is here to help make sense of how those systems, how those resources within the system interrelate. And so one of the things that the partners have done together is collaborate on something called a system map, which is essentially a high-level visual of the available resources for organizations to manage their impacts. And it's there to help practitioners and the wider community, such as policymakers, understand this system, understand where to start, how to go about it, how might one resource differ from another. Because what might seem as a proliferation of standards and guidance is actually, to an extent, a very intricate system of resources. It's just about getting to grips and understanding what to use for when. I'm not sure if I have time to share my screen, but I would encourage everybody to have a look at the system map. It's very easy to find on the platform website. It is there sectioned out in terms of different types of resources, from standards, guidance, tools, indicators, metrics. It's there. It shows you how the different resources pertain to different actions of impact management, which is what I just mentioned earlier. Okay. So it's there as the kind of step-by-step guidance, and also importantly signposts you, it links you back to those resources so that people can actually go and get started.
Okay. Joe, could you because I'm going to ask Vincent a question at the moment, could you maybe just put the link for that map in the chat for everybody? And I want everyone to know as well that you can download Joe's deck that she presented there a moment ago. When you come into the events page on the ESG Exchange website, you'll be able to access the video, of course, and download that. Joe, different tools, different purposes. Help me to make sense of it all. My apologies, Vincent is the question. It's the person.
That's me. Thanks so much, Peter, and thanks so much for having me also today. I work with Joe on the impact management platform and on developing the system map as well. Look, the first thing that I'll say, and I'm also monitoring the questions in the chat, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about disclosure regulation. And the first thing that I'll say is that impact management has a few different components, and disclosure is very much one component of impact management, but it's but one component of impact management. And impact management is really about practice as well. It's about the different steps that organizations take to achieve sustainability on their way to achieve sustainability. And those steps are necessary to take in order to have good disclosure, right? So the disclosure piece and the practice piece, as you will, are very much related. And when Joe speaks about the system of standards and resources, that system is richer than just disclosure standards, right? Of course, disclosure reporting frameworks and standards are a part of that system, but there are many other pieces of tools and guidance available to organizations to manage their impacts beyond those disclosure standards, and really using and leveraging those tools and standards are really important in order to have good disclosures. There are also different tools and guidance for different purposes. Joe spoke a little bit before about, organizations having different entry points into impact management. Some are there really to manage, risks of adverse impact, so risks of negative impacts, perhaps don't necessarily have impact very central in their strategy or their vision. There are other organizations out there that really do, incorporate impact considerations in their strategy and vision, and there are specific tools for each of those purposes. And so what I would encourage organizations to do is to really think about, your purpose with regards to sustainability, to look at that map of the system and to identify the tools that are relevant for you, and those tools will help you to also advance your sustainability disclosures. The one other thing that I will say is that, that map is not static. That map is evolving, and the platform really exists to help evolve that map in a way that is useful for practitioners. And to use the words of our colleague Corinne, what we want to do is, rather than having this kind of landscape that we arrived at by default or by kind of the evolution of the landscape, we really want to move to a system by design. So create this system in a way that works, in which resources work in an interoperable manner vis-a-vis each other. And that's what the partners of this platform are aiming to do together by collaborating around making these resources really fit well against vis-a-vis each other.
Thanks, Vincent. Lisa, when I think of you in your profile, I think of the voice of the customer, the organization. Can you chime in here on this whole thing of how our organization is going to embrace all of this? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being at nowhere and 10 being very advanced, leading. Maybe you could tell us, where in your experience our organizations are on the scale of 1 to 10 in understanding what's involved here in impact management.
Oh, that's a great question. I thought I had nothing to add after this excellent presentation from Joe and Vincent. Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for the invitation. I think I would say that there's a lot of knowledge, but there's a lot of confusion, meaning that in practical terms, people are doing a lot, and they all have a good intent in a sense of when they want to really manage, ESG risks that affect the financial value of the enterprise or the operations, they do it well, the best they can. When they want to do no harm, they also do it well. They try to do good to stakeholders, they do it well. And when they go after the SDGs, they do it well. I think the problem is that we don't even are aware or acknowledge the difference explicitly when we talk to each other or to others, right? So all these different, I have a stare that differentiates this, right? Doing the obvious, manage your risk. Do good, okay, do no harm, and try to benefit stakeholders. Do the extra mile, achieve the SDGs. Okay, all of that can be called sustainability. It can even be called ESG sometimes. So I think for me, in practical, there's a lot of knowledge, although there's gap tools, but there's knowledge. And the problem is that sometimes we don't know what we're talking about, because we talk a lot about tools, use terminology as if it's obvious. Once a company told me, oh, we changed the name of our division from sustainability to ESG. And I said, why? Right? Because I have in mind the definition from the UN. And they said, because everybody thought if sustainability is environmental. And I thought, oh my God. And that took me in my trainings, because I also wear the hat. I always start by terminology, and I sit people and I say, okay, what are we talking about? And then the findings are amazing. I mean, really, out of 25 people in a room, maybe 3 have the same definition. So I would say that maybe the first step is, okay, being kind of humble, but also confident that there are things we know, okay? But the way we call them, maybe others call it differently. So what are we talking about, right? And being very humble in that sense. And then that's really important. What are we talking about in terms of just baseline? Number 1. But then 2, okay, now that we understand what you call what, by the way, there's a glossary that, you know, the impact management platform has that you can use, which is good to have an external reference. Otherwise, we end up with 8 billion definitions, okay? But we talk about the same thing. Now, second assumption, we don't all have the same goals, right? So that's really, really important because we all want to do sustainability, but really it might be very different. And we need to be able to just say it and not be judgmental, okay? The most important thing to move forward the agenda is at least understand who's doing what, so we can join forces with whoever has similar goals, because we will need that to achieve goals. So that's number 2. And then number 3, once you know what's your goal, the terminology is clear, or more or less, and you're willing to translate. Like, you know, you don't tell a French person this word is wrong and the British is good. It's just another language. Okay, we agree on the translation. We know the objectives, who's doing what, and then you go to the tools, which I think the resource, you know, that you mentioned is just fantastic. So that would be my 2 cents. And I said, when you go to another organization, but within organizations, believe me, this is not obvious. So for me, that's where I would start.
Cool. I got 2 more questions I'm going to ask. The last question is about how organizations can apply this thinking to themselves. So there's a takeaway for people here, but there's a question in the middle. But just a thought that I would share that, you know, I'm really curious about that organization that changed from sustainability to ESG, because my take on it is that the, you know, ESG is just the data, these data, right? The E, S, and G metrics, all different taxonomies, all units of measure, have to make sense of it, aggregate it up. Sustainability is the outcome. Sustainable performance over the long term, whilst doing no harm today or for future generations. So that's a clear distinction I think that people need to have. So now we've discussed the platform, we've discussed the imperative, we've discussed the existence of tools. I'm going to ask a question, but first now to Joe, to Vincent, because Joe, maybe if you could find the link for the glossary that Melissa made reference to and put it in the chat. Did you? Super. So we've discussed the platform, but you know, what is impact management, and how is it? How in particular, how is it different? How is it different from other sustainability related practices? And Vincent, I'm going to throw that question at you first.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's a good question, and I think it is a little bit mired in confusion as well. I think the first thing to say is that, you know, many organizations do address, you know, their impacts to some extent. In the example that Joe gave in the introduction, you know, oil companies will certainly put in place processes in order to minimize the risks of an oil spill, because they know that you know, there are reputational or other risks associated with that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have you know, what we refer to as a robust or holistic impact management process in place. And there are perhaps a few things that I might highlight that really set impact management apart. So first, a consideration of both, you know, negative and positive impacts, a real understanding of, you know, where an organization might, you know, might contribute to sustainability and solutions, but also not forgetting, you know, the possible negative or adverse or unintended impacts that happen in the process, and really addressing those. The second is what we call a holistic consideration of impacts. And that really means having a systematic approach to identifying and prioritizing your impact. So for example, you know, if you're a bank, it's great that, you know, you have programs in place to address, you know, the well-being of your employees. But if you're not addressing, you know, the kind of billions of dollars or euros that you have outstanding in loans to fossil fuel companies, then there's something, you know, perhaps missing in the way that you're assessing the most significant risks to your entity. And so what we say, you know, is that it's critical to have a really holistic approach where enterprises systematically understand where they may have the most negative and most negative impacts and the opportunities for positive impacts, and not do that in an ad hoc manner, but really do that in a systematic manner. The third is really integrating considerations for impacts across strategy, governance, and management. Impact management doesn't happen at the margin. It's not something that you can have a dedicated project for. It's really about integrating it within your strategy, embedding impact considerations in governance structures, and infusing that throughout your practice and the way that you operate. First to last, or almost the last, is an evidence-based approach, and an iterative approach to practicing impact management. So it's the idea of really learning from experience, assessing what is working well, and adapting based on those experiences, right? We often see that organizations find best practices or follow the buzzwords of the day without really understanding whether certain interventions are effective within their own organizations. And so we really encourage a thorough learning process in an impact management approach. And then the last one is one that you're very familiar with, which is transparency on practice and performance. So communicating, your impacts outwards and your management processes. But again, like I said earlier, that communication is not, it's not the only thing, right? It's about the management process that leads up to what you're disclosing or communicating outwards.
Thanks, Vincent. And Joe, I'm conscious that, the little visual that we used to promote this event here was a pebble dropping into a puddle of water and the ripple effect, which really, the idea of systems thinking and so forth. So maybe could you chime in and follow on from what Joe was saying there as to what's the difference between impact management and other sustainability-related practices?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vincent just talked about what are the fundamental characteristics of impact management versus other sustainability practices, which has been agreed and put forward by the partners. What the partners have also done is gone a step further to outline what are the common actions that any organization can take to manage their impact. If you'd allow me, I'll just show one more slide, just because I think this is quite helpful to show another visual just to support. Here we go. Yeah, so the actions of impact management is a really important part in the consensus building process of the partners, because what the listener was saying, we need to have confidence in what we know, and these actions here are really setting out the steps in which any organization can take. And what the partners have done is work together to provide against all of these different segments of the wheel, from understanding how to integrate impact management into your strategy and governance, to the internal management actions, from identifying potential sustainability topics to going right through the process to then communicating those the impact performance of your organization, and then externally assuring, verifying, certifying, benchmarking, rating that performance. But what all of these different segments do on the platform's website is really break down what is involved in each. And then importantly, in order to carry out those different approaches, what are the different resources to support that? So yeah, it's about providing confidence on what we know together as part of the system, so that it is more accessible to anybody that is looking to engage with impact management more concertedly.
Thanks, Joe. Belita, the voice of the customer, can you chime in and follow on from what Joe and Vincent have said there?
Yes, sure. There is a question on the chat that's helpful, that talks about risk management and whether embedding environmental and social considerations into the risk management would just solve for it. And that makes me think, well, Vincent and I were the other day talking about the same thing. So maybe what I would like to say, and I go back to risk in a minute, is impact management. The key words, of course, is impact, but management too, right? So this is not measurement. And I want to really say this is what it's not. It's not about measuring, and it's not technical. Management is for managers. And in the organization, as a practitioner, and I'm working with this asset manager, I tell them, you all will be, by the end of my reign, I say, impact managers, all of you, not impact technical experts. we call them as needed, but we all be managers. Why? Because the manager is really there to, I don't know, manage the day-to-day, manage the resources, manage the uncertainty, managing risk to achieve a goal, right? And that goal in a business is, okay, we want to generate profit. So what we are saying here is that imagine that organization will say, well, I want to generate profit, but for sure doing no harm. That's not acceptable anymore. So I need to manage the risk of doing harm. I will try to do good. Of course, I need to manage risks that affect, my supply chain, obviously, but I will try to contribute to the SDGs. So now this manager needs to manage all of that. The risks that affect its operations, the risk of doing harm, increase the likelihood of doing good, and trying to contribute to solutions, because also there are business opportunities within sustainability and all the changes we're seeing, right? So this is the job of a manager, that the managers of today, I hope, and tomorrow for sure, will go after those goals. Then what they need to do is take a managerial approach that considers prioritization and risk management. You have limited resources, so you cannot go after every risk. You cannot go after every goal. So you prioritize how, oh gosh, if ESG that affects my operations, the risk, what are the highest risks? I need to assess that. If there's a risk of doing harm in my supply chain, okay, depends. Is it minor, or I'm talking about human rights, child labor? Oh, that's huge. I need to look at that, right? And then benefiting stakeholders. It's not the same to give, healthcare to a Shanika woman in the Amazon or improve my healthcare. That's going to be good for me, but I already have healthcare, right? So all of that is the job of the manager. So it has prioritization on it. It has a risk-based management approach that's, sometimes it's going to be, as usual, ESG for financial purposes. Everybody's been doing it for years, but then you're going to enter the realm of impact, and that needs to be managed too. And then what Vincent said, which is adjust as needed, right? The difference between being a technical person, I think, in impact measurement and a manager is that we cannot fall in love with our research and our metrics, with all due respect. It has to be based on risks and for managerial purposes. And many times, managers will take decisions based on imperfect data. And in that case, what do? What is the risk of not having data? If the risk is very high, I need to find a way of mitigating and trying to find the data. But if the risk is low, I have to accept that I can live with it, right? So I would say it's almost like, instead of really taking the impact specialist realm, and managers to this, I will take that we need to move towards the managers, because if we change the manager's mindset, they will drive us to success, as they has done, for years. So yeah, those are my how I see it, and this is how I'm applying it in my practice today.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Melissa. I've said in previous tech talks that ESG it's just old risk management wine in a new bottle, and you've pretty much said that. And by the way, a risk is just something that will stop us or slow us down or whatever achieving an objective. That's all it is. Or it might be failing to see an opportunity to do something. That's all it is. It's organized common sense. And really what impact management is just mindful management, it seems to me. So I'm actually going to jump into Mark, Vincent.
Sorry, Peter, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to add one more addition to that conversation, which is that, I think technically risks are the potential of some event, going to happen, right? And so you can manage risks of certain impacts that are going to happen, sure, but oftentimes actually organizations are aware of the impacts that are happening, and they are not just risks, they are just simply materialized impacts, right? And so in that sense, there is maybe a slight difference there, that, if you do know that your operations are heavily dependent on some kind of environmental pollutant, you need to make a plan on how to address that. And it's not about managing a risk, it's about managing something that is very real, that that is happening and that needs to change.
I agree with you entirely. Carolyn, whilst I'm asking the third and last questions, and we've only got 10 minutes left, my goodness, time flies, you're having a good time. As we're putting up our second poll question, I'm going to start with you, Melissa, now. What can organizations do in practical terms, again, through the lens, the voice of the customer? How can the people who are attending this webinar bring some ideas back to their own organizations? Where can they start in big and basic practical terms?
Thank you for the question, and I think it's very useful what Vincent just said, because, well, I start with the people, right? I think that's the key. You don't start with a framework or with tools that you then come and just push around. So you need to understand what people are, and it sounds cliche, but it's just real, because on your own, and usually many impact specialists complain that they have small teams and not resources. In my mind, in this organization, I have all the resources because I'm working with them for the buy-in to then move around, right? So with the agenda. So people, then we said already, but start with the why we're doing this, and aligning again to what they want to achieve is the easiest way forward, right? So if you work, for example, with an impact investor, it's very easy, actually. They want financial return and they want impact. So then you say, if you want financial return, do you think that managing environmental risk, for these investees is important? And they will say, oh yeah. So then maybe it's not a bad idea if, this person came with SASB. Oh yeah, actually, it's helping me, right? It's very simple. Then, okay, and then you say, want impact. Yeah, we want impact. And then, okay, and the intended impact, everybody wants intended impact. Yeah, but then you bring very simply, for example, the electric vehicles that now is everywhere. Oh, do you know that you agreed with the electric vehicle that there's a risk in the supply chain with the cobalt, the lithium batteries? Oh yeah. So then for us, it's the same, right? You need to manage the negative impacts. And sometimes even Vincent, I agree 100% with what you say, but what I'm seeing is that sometimes they are not aware of it. It's not the lens that they see it through, right? So when I talk about this risk terminology, it's just because that they understand. Those that are not impact, they understand it. And then they will even say, oh, it's not even a risk, it's happening, I know. But sometimes you start with a more conceptual thing. Okay, map your supply chain. What do you think is happening? Because they don't have data. And somebody in the chat said, and of course you need data. And I'm 100%, I'm an M&E person, international development. I love data. I'm just saying that I also know that sometimes we get too passionate about the data. And sometimes it's hard to get it, and we need to take decisions without data. But so going back, so the people, the why, speaking their language as much as possible, right? Instead of workshopping theory of change. For God's sake, they've been doing strategy for opening, products and entering markets for years. Just, can you speak their language? And then they will come up with a theory of change. And then you tell them, hey, look, you just did a theory of change, just because you asked the right questions, right? So I see that starting with the people, starting with the why, agreeing on purpose and terminology, and trying us to speak their language goes much, much further than the other way around. And also being patient, because if we spend time on that process, that maybe we're late with the policy that we had to write, maybe the tool, we're 1 month late with the tool. But if you spend the time of getting through this process, then you go fast because the buy-in is there. And that's the easy part. Policies you can copy, tools, exclusion lists, you can just push it down the throat. But all that is a checklist exercise. What's going to really drive the change is if people are behind, because they are their first line of defense for managing damage that's happening, or risks that are happening, or potential. So I think it's like a reverse engineering a little bit. And just to finish, I would say that the goal, they are all managers of impact. There are few technical people. And I forgot, maybe the step 0 is that in an organization, build trust. And that's the human touch. And again, it might sound a little bit cheesy, but if people trust you, right? Not only in your CV, but as a person, you will communicate, you will have dialogue, and that's constructive, and then that's going to move the organization forward. So those will be my steps. And then for the tools per se, you call Joe or Vincent, and they will guide you through all of these organizations that you have seen. I have to tell you, and it's a big secret, but now I'm going to get in troubles. Contact them. It's in their mandate to respond and help you and guide you and respond to your questions. So just contact them. And if you're lost, they will tell you, look at this tool, look at this tool. I have this webinar. So reach out, because you're not alone, and you cannot imagine all the work behind this platform that we've done when I was at UNDP. So just really focus on the people, and for the technical, just call Vincent or Joe and it's going to be sorted out. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Melissa. We've only got 4 minutes left. Oh my goodness, Joe, quickly into you, this question.
I don't think I can say much more to that brilliant answer. I echo everything that Melissa just said. And do just have a look on the website. Get started. Just start. If you're really at the baseline of this, perhaps the actions is a good place just to understand what is involved. But yeah, please just start, and echo everything Melissa just said.
Cool. Vincent?
Yeah, ditto. I mean, I do, keep thinking about the fact that many people are here perhaps because they have an interest in reporting. And maybe one small suggestion that I would make is that, realize that your materiality assessment, if you are doing some kind of impact materiality assessment, that is so useful, not just for your disclosures, but also for these management processes. That's really, the moment where you're mapping where your organization's biggest impacts are. And that should not just inform your disclosures, but also be the first step in your management process. So look at our actions, look at that identify action, which is really the first step, and realize that the practice and the disclosure are very much related.
Excellent. I want to do two things now in the 4 minutes. I got 2 minutes back, I thought. Before close, one, I want to ask, I'll put up our last poll question, Caroline, but also, Caroline, could you maybe, is there any particular question that's been asked or comment that's been passed in the chat that you'd like to highlight? We just put it to the panelists.
There are so many questions, and I think this has really been a lot of food for thought. The first one that's got 2 thumbs up is from Lee Swan. Is there any available best practice guidance on how to measure impact at a portfolio level? So in other words, a roll-up of all underlying investments for investors. Thanks.
Who would take that? Who would like to grab that? Sounds like a Belissa one. Is it, Belissa?
Yeah, I can do it. Well, I rely then on my colleagues, but in my experience, I will look at the work of Impact Frontiers. They really they took under their wing to really guide investors on how to integrate impact goals with adjusted financial returns to manage a portfolio. So there's a lot there on how many organizations have done it. It's been a few cohorts. So I would look at it. Everything is a public good and it's published. Now, as I just have to give you a heads up, usually these impact targets are built around impact ratings or scorings that are different for organizations. So I'm not sure if your question goes towards that, but that's an interesting resource. On the other hand, if you want to just metrics at the portfolio level, right, sometimes by sector or in general, you can look at Iris Plus, HIPSO, and I think many more. That will be in the platform too. They will tell you all these available resources. So that would be my 2 cents. Hopefully it answers the question.
Okay, just interesting result here in terms of thanks for that, Melissa. The third result, the first 2 questions that we asked, the responses were decidedly on the positive yes. But as we get closer to the how to do the stuff back in our organizations, I can see that it's more balanced between yes and I think so. Look, I'd like to thank our panelists for a really, really stimulating conversation. We've shared an awful lot of information, provide really good links to people. The only thing I have to say in closing our event is to all our participants, myself and our panelists, we've got to be careful out there. When in doubt, let's all do the right thing. Let's always do it the right way. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.